Good morning, all. As I cheerfully welcomed us back this morning, as you know, David and I have been in India. He came back a week ago, and I came back Friday. Friday's some time zone Friday. It's a complete flip over from India, 12 hours this way. So after 36 hours, I'm more or less present. Although I've been told, I've heard, and I don't know if it's true or not, but this is what it feels like, that a jet airplane moves faster than your aura can move. Doesn't make any sense, but that's sort of what it feels like. Your physical body goes through this extremely strange experience of just being in that vibrating thing for, excuse me a second. Where we were, as you know, because most of you got the letters that we wrote, we first met Swami Kriyananda at a resort in Goa, which is not really India, because Goa was Portuguese until 1960, and we were just at a resort. So it has some of the factors of India, but really it was just beautiful beach and sand and sun, and we converged with a lot of our friends, mostly from America, so it was really quite delightful. And then when David came home, I went on to our community in Pune, outside of Pune, actually near the village of Watunda, but Watunda is not easy to find on a map. So we say it's outside of Pune, but it's a good solid hour away, and it is a fledgling community. Ananda's been in India, our work has been in India since 2003, and we've been on that land now for a few years. I'm not quite sure how many. So I was really interested and eager to see it. It is building another community from the dust. I mean, there was nothing there except one what they called the long house, one characteristic building of that area. Everything else has had to be built from the ground up. And it turns out that even though we were promised there was water on the land, there's no actual water on the land. So they had to buy a little piece of the river, and then they have to truck the water in. And all of this is challenging enough in an American culture, and it's add when you're doing it in India. So it was totally fun and absolutely enjoyable. God willing, I would have stayed there forever, but God wasn't willing, and probably many of you wouldn't have been either. So, but it was just so interesting just to see it all starting over again. As most of you know, I was part of Ananda Village in the early 70s, so I've done it once. I've seen it come up from nothing. When we brought it up from pretty much nothing here too, but nothing in Palo Alto is really, really different than nothing in Watunda, India. Believe me, you don't know nothing till you've been there. The whole area is rural, and it's you think rural in this country, rural in India is really completely different. I mean, the closest village, Watunda, has been there for 1,000 years, and certain aspects of it haven't changed. Certain aspects have. They have loudspeakers, which is not to the benefit of anyone that they have them, because they can project what they do in such a way that you can hear it all across the whole valley. And you don't always want to hear what's going on in that village, chanting and banging of drums and so on. But still, walking through the village, as I did the last day we were there, on little dirt paths, stepping aside so the cows can go by, the women with the water jugs on their head. Ananda coming there is like from another planet, not merely another country, like another planet, just dropping in with a whole other reality that we're manifesting there that is completely different than the people have seen before. We would like to have a very idealistic idea of the people who are in residence, but self-interest is universal, whatever your country, whatever your caste. So we're working out all the, oh look, you're so rich, take care of us. You're doing all those things for yourselves, do all those things for us. And other more uplifted attitudes, but it's quite a story. My being there, however, is not, my coming back and talking to about you about all of this is not just to talk about that community, but the astonishing universal lessons of consciousness that we can learn when we shift our physical bodies and are looking at an entirely different reality. Everything changes, nothing changes. I was sort of in the middle of the night last night when my body decided it was time to be awake, even though it wasn't time to be awake. It's just so extraordinary to contemplate the ever-changing, never-changing character of reality. And hearing our particular reading today, which has always been one of my favorites, whenever virtue declines and vice predominates, I, the infinite Lord, take form among you to destroy vice and reestablish virtue. Now, that is a glorious promise that God has made to us in the presence of the Masters. But the other aspect of that particular scripture reading, which I've always loved to contemplate, is that it's also a very personal promise. Because the question of vice and virtue, certainly in a cosmic sense, is relevant, especially when dark energy invades where we live, and all of a sudden the calm progression of our life is profoundly interrupted. In America, we haven't experienced that, you would say, since the Great Depression. I would say 9/11 walked in and certainly startled and destroyed a great deal of our confidence. But nonetheless, for quite a long time, we just live uninterrupted. But nonetheless, in an individual and a personal way, we're always going through this up and down of consciousness. We're always having this experience of great light, and then great disappointment, and then great light, and then great struggles, and you just sort of see this cosmic drama playing itself out wherever you are. Because India is kind of a crossroads country, as I wrote to all of you, in the little group of 30 or 40 people that was gathered there for this week that I happened to be there, there were like 6 or 8 countries represented. And more than ever before, the myth of nationality was really dissolved for me. Partly because we were all in such an isolated place, and because where we were really bore no relationship to anybody's particular country. We were located in India, but a great deal of the tone had been set by Americans, and yet most of the people around us were Indian, but they were all there out of an attraction for spiritual life. And then 2 people who'd come from Russia, which is always a whole nother reality, Russia, the consciousness of the country of Russia, and then we had Europeans, Italians, Swiss, and some 2 brothers from Uruguay, 3 people from Uruguay. So you're all sort of sitting there together, and you sort of can't really tell who anybody is or what anybody is, because all of our values have been molded by now. Cultural is incidental to the unifying principle, which is that we are all there to transcend ego identification and to find ourselves one with the infinite. All of those realities of country and culture and language and so on are all just factors of the body we were born into, and then the intensity of the identification that we have or don't have with that body. But being as I was, this was partly of my midnight, or my actual 2 a.m. is the magic hour in which you wake up when you come from India. So it's from 2 to 5 that you get to sort of lie there and wonder who and what you really are. And so I was lying there wondering who and what I really was, having moved my body such a long distance. Of course, after so many years on the spiritual path, I was contemplating, among other things, the fact that I no longer think of it, or I try not to think of it, as myself. Of course, it is myself because it's where I usually am, which is inside this body. And so it is myself that I've moved in a certain sense, but the sense of consciousness as being independent of body is greatly enhanced when you just take the body and confuse it to such a large extent that the 2 parts of you become very strongly divided. And I had the sensation that I've had many times in my life, which is what largely drove me to the spiritual path, and I don't know how else to phrase it except very bluntly, absolute terror at the complete, omnipresent, inescapable reality of myself. I remember, even as a young teenager, just in me, and maybe it's not so in everyone, every so often, and I mean this seriously, I have to discipline a rising sense of panic about the inescapability of consciousness. In fact, Swami Kriyananda said once, when a friend of mine had a nervous breakdown, and it was a kind of spiritually induced nervous breakdown is the only way I can say it, a sort of expanding sense of awareness led them into a state of mental imbalance. And Swamiji said very casually, oh yes, madness is a stage on the spiritual path. And that was the impression I'd had, so he was confirming what I knew. He said, you reach a point over many incarnations, and you have to speak of it as many incarnations, because it doesn't happen in every single incarnation, so don't think all of us are sort of destined to go there. He said, but at a certain point, as you awaken from the delusion, at first comfortable delusion and then uncomfortable delusion, of ourselves as our physical bodies, meaning that we're born, we live for a while, we die, and whoops, that's it. As we begin to sort of recognize, either consciously or with a memory that we can't quite grasp, that I've been doing this for a long time. That's how Master describes it in Autobiography of a Yogi. After a while, the cycle of taking birth in a body, living through that incarnation, dying and starting over again, assumes what he called a certain anguishing monotony. And the combination of those two words is a very interesting use of the English language, both anguish and monotony. And there's a certain point, Swamiji was saying, where the soul begins to recognize, the jiva is actually the right word, your individual spark of consciousness, begins to recognize that I have a really big job in front of me. And that job is not to just comfortably just sort of ride incarnation after incarnation, but now I have to take on the very daunting task of expanding my consciousness and really living in this body in right relationship to the eternal realities and not just to the moments that we're living in. And sometimes there's a point, this is Swami said, where the jiva just says, no thank you. You know, I can't go back to pure unconsciousness, but I'm not really willing to strive for super consciousness, so I'm just going to step outside of reality and take a little holiday over here. And I'll just declare reality for whatever I want it to be, for as many incarnations as it takes, until I'm ready to sort of put my boots back on, you know, tighten up the laces, and start the long project forward. When we took the first few days of our journey, and again, some of you know this from the letters, unexpectedly, Swami Kriyananda invited us to go with him on a pilgrimage trip to the southernmost tip of India, literally the southernmost tip, and then beyond the landmass to this big rock that's out a few hundred meters from the end of the landmass of India. 3 oceans come together at that point. So it's a very, but God and nature are all acting in a very exciting way down there at that point. And we took this ferry boat across, and it's a very well-known pilgrimage spot because of the 3 oceans colliding, and because Swami Vivekananda, who was a very great saint of relatively recent times, also had a divine experience on the rock, and a temple's been built in honor of him. So a lot of forces come together. So a lot of people go on pilgrimage there. There were not many Europeans or Americans at all. A few, but very few. It was mostly something that people who live in that area go. And apparently there are these, what I could only probably call pilgrimage clubs, that seem to be made up of the kind of people who live in Watunda, who are not educated, not expansive in their understanding, but are being trained by their village gurus to be more than they are. And so there were these great groups of men, almost exclusively men, often dressed in little similar uniforms. They'd gotten the same dhotis or the same t-shirts. And so there was a whole group of people in black and some in orange and some in yellow. And they were so excited to be there, is the only way I could put it. There were several rows of these people, you know, dozens and dozens of them sitting in front of us on the ferry. And I said to Swamiji afterwards, it's like they just got their senses and they're so excited to have them. You know, I didn't mean to be unkind. There's a story in Autobiography of a Yogi of Master Mahashaya correcting Yogananda for thinking that there's only one way to worship God. They were absolutely sincere in what they were doing, but they were simply, and it just has to be said, they were at a different level of experience than we were. And it was just so exciting for them to be on this adventure that they were just about to burst out of their skins. It was just so much cacophony, and just not merely physical and verbal noise, but just energetic noise. Just so much energetic noise to be on this big adventure, all these men together. And we were just, you just sort of like in the presence of that, you just get more and more and more still. So it made our little row of people, almost motionless just by comparison to the contrast. But looking at them, I thought, all of us have been there. Every single person, even the great masters, everybody goes through all these different stages of evolution. And it's not even there, but for the grace of God, go I. It's not even like, oh, thank God I'm not that person. You are that person. We are everything in this universe. We are all the different aspects of creation that can exist, except we have chosen to identify with one very small part of it, because our senses too are focused here. We are the ego identified with the physical body, trapped in the medulla right here, and from that point we look out. Isn't that so? We're perched at our medulla and we're looking out through our physical eyes, and when we begin to meditate, we look out through our spiritual eye. That's exactly what we do. We just look out like this. And what do we see? What do we see of ourselves? What do we see of this universe? It's all depending on the consciousness that we have. It's what we have experienced is what we see. When I was in Pune, in the Pune community there, various of us who were visiting gave some of the morning presentations just to give a chance for everybody to get to know each other. And Anand, who with his wife Kirtani is the leader of the Ananda community in Assisi, Italy. He's an American. He's been living, I don't know if I should put those on tape, he's been living illegally in that country for 2 decades. He's just about to become legal, and he was coming through Switzerland, and for the first time somebody noticed, and he got thrown out. He couldn't go back to Europe. He was going to be deported if he did. They just pick you and they move you back to your home country. So he had to stay out of Italy until they got the papers straightened out, which they actually did get them straightened out, because he was right on the edge of becoming a legal resident of there. So he was trapped in India, which was not really a hardship assignment, but he was just hanging out there until he could get back to Italy. So he and I gave a class together, and the subject, well, I don't know what the subject was exactly for him. He just talked, but I ended up talking about faith, about what you believe in and how you have to build your life around that. I was partly doing that because looking at that project, I thought, boy, these people need faith in what they're doing. There's no way they're going to make this happen unless they really believe they can do that. I mean, no shred of doubt can enter their minds, or they're finished in that situation. But Anand has a very different attitude in mind than I have. And he gave this impassioned story about the atom. I mean, atom, not Adam like Adam and Eve, but the atom. And he had all these quotes from Master that I don't remember any of them. I never noticed any of them about the atom and how we can contemplate the atom and how we can become the atom. And he went on for a very long time, and it meant a great deal to him, and he did it very articulately. And I didn't really say this, but I thought about it later. I don't think I've ever thought about the atom. And I certainly have not built my spiritual life on the atom. But to a very large extent, I think Anand has. This picture of cosmic reality and how the atom, God is in all the atoms, and Master said things about not merely contemplating the atom, but becoming the atom. And I thought, wow, if it was just me and the atoms, I would never get out of bed. I don't know. But for him, it was so just dynamic and beautiful, and many people were deeply inspired by his conversation about the atom. And in fact, what I said afterwards was actually very closely related to what he said. I didn't tie it together because I only really thought about it later. Because what I was talking about, and I take this from Sister Gyanamata, you have to build your experience on what you actually, you have to build your spiritual life on what you have actually experienced and what you can actually understand. Now, I believe that Anand has experienced the atom. I think the atom is a very real quality to him. You know, that he can look at things and he just sees it from that point of view. But what Sister Gyanamata tells us, which is so important, is you have to build your spiritual life on something that actually moves you. And this is what I'm trying to put together here. You can't just have some theoretical idea about what religion is. You can't just go and have other people tell you, this is what we believe, this is what's true, you'll go to hell if you'll do this, you'll go to heaven if you do that. It has to be something that when you wake up in the middle of the night with jet lag, and you don't really quite know where you are or who you are, and you're a little nervous about all of it, you have to find something that actually brings your consciousness to a place of courage and rest that nothing can take away from you. Because sooner or later, we all find ourselves alone. I flew back by myself. I often travel by myself, so in and of itself, that's not an unusual thing for me to do. I'm comfortable with that. In fact, it's sort of fun to be just like way somewhere else. Nobody has any idea who you are. You're just this little atom of consciousness. How's that? Just floating around. When I flew once to India by myself and I went through Seoul, South Korea, because it was a very good connection. And I had some hours of interlude in that airport. And it was a nifty airport, and it was a pleasant place to be. And then I started just imagining, not so much with fear, but just out of interest, what if something happened and, you know, all the planes got canceled or a war broke out and I had to live the rest of my life in Seoul, South Korea? You know, and I just started imagining learning Korean, starting a meditation center, getting an Ananda group going. You know, just like if my little self had to recreate its own reality without the benefit of anything I'm used to, how would I do that? And flying in the airplane on Emirates airline back from Dubai, you know, all these hours, you know, every so often it's possible to scare yourself. Oh, here I am rattling around in the sky with all these hundreds of people, 30,000 feet in the air or whatever it is. What if? What if? What if? And spirituality is not about getting up on Sunday mornings and coming in here and sitting with a few folks. It's the capacity to be able to manage your own consciousness and to constantly redirect it toward a state of awareness that is the state of awareness that we want to have. Because that's all we ever have, no matter where we take it. And you know, moving back and forth across the world in a matter of just a few hours, being totally one place and then totally another place, just makes it dramatic. But it's what we're always working with. And when I was there in that community, really trying to help people get solidly grounded on the spiritual path and be able to go forward for the next 35 years, you know, to turn that community into what it needs to be. And there were a lot of young people there, and a lot of the visitors, myself, Anand, Jyotish and Devi, Durga and Vidura, Jaya and Sadhana Devi actually live in India, but they just shifted from Delhi down to Pune. And Uma from Italy, she was also there. Uma, who used to live here, who's English and moved back to Europe and now is there. I mean, it was just a big, delightful mishmash. Most of us, I say us because we were the visitors, you know, are 60 years old. And most of us have spent from 30 to 40 years building Ananda and doing what they're about to do there. And many of the people there are quite young. There's a really strong group, especially of young men, young monks, and brahmacharis who are in their 20s. And we were trying to help them have the courage and the enthusiasm to give the rest of their lives to this project. So that was the idea of talking about what this can give you and wanting them to ground themselves from the very beginning in something that would really work for them. So again, coming back to, I was talking about you have to build your faith on something that is not merely theoretical, but is your actual experience. And I never got to the point of articulating what I'm about to say right now. I don't believe in the atom. I'm not doing it for the atom. I believe in the fact that if every day I try to help other people, at the end of that day I feel a lot better than I did when I woke up. Just as simple as that. And that's really from my own life, from a child really. That's really what I always wanted to do. I always wanted to be helpful to people. There was a very strong empathetic thread in me that sensed that other people were not as happy as they could be, and I would like to help them to be happy. Now, for 20 years of my life, even that desire was actually problematic. Even though it was in there, I didn't have the foggiest idea how to help people. And everything that I wanted to do to help them, there was just always a problem in it. Because, well, this problem was very simple. I was completely ignorant. I myself did not know how to be happy. I just knew that it was there to happen, and that somehow or another it must be possible to put all this together. Even though I lived a relatively active life until I was 20, my memory of myself is just standing there. Because no matter what was going on around me, it never quite fulfilled this longing that I had in my heart to be helpful to others in a way that I actually, well, had faith in. And then I found out about self-realization. Then I found out about avatars and masters. And soon after I found out about Swami Kriyananda and Ananda. And I found a place where I could stand. Past karma, past lives of living these teachings, I'm certain, made me confident in that. So it was really a point I could stand. Not everyone immediately, when they hear about avatars and masters and Ananda, have the same experience that I had, but I did. But everybody has some point where they can stand. I keep backing up. You've heard me do this before. You keep backing up from the atom. Anand just stands here on the atom. And he believes in the atom. And he can just go forward and give his life to God because of the atom. You know, mine is so much, has to be in my hands a little bit more. Oh, you're unhappy today. What can I do to comfort you? Oh, you have a complete lack of sense of meaning in your life. Let me talk to you about God. Oh, you feel nervous. Let me help you with meditation. Lying awake in the middle of the night, no condition to get up and meditate, I promise you. If I sat up and meditate, I would probably I knew I would just be repeating the movies that I watched flying home, on Emirates Airline. God bless them, they had so many movies, 16 hours, you can go, quite a long time. But they were all just roiling around in my head, which is part of why I felt so crazy. But I was thinking about the absolute inescapability of my own consciousness. I realized, that's meditation. That's what meditation is for. Because what happens to us in meditation, and it doesn't happen right away, and it doesn't happen every time, is you get out. For just a moment, you get out. You're no longer bound by that anguishing sense of, oh, here we are again. Oh, here we are again. Just me, always me, endlessly me. At first we celebrate that, me, endlessly me. What else is wisdom if not to take what is mine for myself? The little bird is so excited. It has the power to do things. That's what those men on that ferry boat, look at us doing this. Look at me doing this. And all I could think was, oh, those poor souls. But I could feel it because been there, done that. And whether you're a movie star or a villager on a ferry boat to Kanyakumari, it doesn't really make any difference. It's the same anguishing sense of monotony, of waking up every morning with that appalling sense of self-limitation. My life as a disciple of Master surprised me. I never had any idea when I was younger that I would become this person. But when I look back, I realized that I always was trying to become this person, because what made me miserable was this extraordinary sense of limitation imposed upon me by my identification with my ego. And my first solution in life was to have a lot of children, because self-evidently there would be one and then there would be lots more. And it looked to me like that would allow me to escape from this sense of limitation. And then at one point I realized that even if there were a dozen of them, it would still be this very small circle in the universe. And almost in that moment I lost interest in having children, and I never have. Just because it wasn't going to do for me what I actually was trying to have happen. Because it was me I was trying to escape from. And then self-realization comes and says, you can. Because you are not limited, you never have been, and all you need to do is realize that. So when we meditate, even if the experience doesn't come immediately, what we're doing is we're simply reversing that focus from the limited self to the infinite self. And if we do that again and again and again, and that's what we do when we serve, we reverse the focus from the limited self to the unlimited self. In our affirmation today, that which I share, I do not really lose, because I still have it in my greater reality. Isn't that a beautiful thought? I was so impressed when we were going through that, because I still have it in my greater reality. I transfer it from my limited to my unlimited self. But my unlimited self is more who I am than the limited self. In truth, that's the atom, isn't it? And that's exactly what Ananda was inspired by in his own way, is that the very fabric of my being is infinite. And instead of expanding it out through all these other persons, I go right into the atom, I become one with the atom, and through the atom I become infinite. So maybe I do believe in the atom. I never thought of it that way. But who's to say? But the solution to everything, because all suffering is caused by a false identification with limitation, all happiness comes when that limitation begins to dissolve and we know ourselves as we truly are. You know, even a little practice of this inward religion, so the Gita promises us, will free us from dire fears and colossal sufferings. Because whenever virtue declines, whenever happiness wanes within us, I, the infinite spirit, come and free us from that suffering.